They sentenced her to death for saving a life. Kayla Frost stood trial in a chamber that smelled like burnt ozone and regret, facing execution for feeding a baby Dreadclaw. But when the fully grown predator appeared, it didn't tear her apart. It recognized the human who saved it 12 years earlier. Now the entire Galactic Concordance must answer one question. Is compassion a crime? The air itself feels different in judgment chambers. You notice it first in the metallic tang that coats your tongue, a scent like scorched circuits and something sweet gone sour. They pipe it in, I'm told. That artificial ozone scent mixed with a pheromone cocktail meant to encourage submission. 36 species fill the observation tiers, their varied silhouettes casting jagged shadows against the cold light of the central platform. This room wasn't built for debate. It was engineered for verdicts. Kayla Frost stands centered in all that scrutiny, her posture straight but not defiant. Just waiting. Her hands remain at her sides, palms open. The prosecutor's voice cuts through the humming silence, each word precise and sharp as a surgical instrument. He reads the charges like items on a shipping manifest. 18 counts of unauthorized interspecies contact. Each one represents a specific moment she crossed the line they drew in the sand. Count 4. Administering unregulated medical aid to a Class 3 predator. Count 7. Providing nutrition outside approved conservation protocols. Count 12. Physical contact without protective barriers. They don't mention the creature's infected wound pulsing with fever, or the way its breathing hitched. They just list the violations. The 18th charge gets its own special pause. Preservation Act breach, Article 47. That one carries maximum penalty under galactic law. But the real irony hangs in the air thicker than the ozone. Criminal negligence. They're charging her with endangering an ecosystem because she stopped a sentient being from dying in a poacher's net. Saving a life becomes the capital crime here. The magistrate's voice slices through the theater of it all, clean and dispassionate. She might as well be reading engine temperature reports. Every delegate in that chamber knows this isn't really about one field researcher breaking rules. They're testing whether mercy has a place in their perfectly ordered universe. The tension isn't about guilt or innocence, it's about whether compassion itself constitutes a threat to their system. Kayla's just the convenient test case. When the magistrate finishes the charges, the silence feels heavier than before. Not the quiet of contemplation, but the dead air before an execution. You can almost feel the weight of all those eyes, the collective breath held across species lines. They designed this chamber to handle final judgments, and everyone present understands what that means. The prosecutor adjusts his robe, a subtle movement that draws attention back to the list in his hands. He doesn't look at Kayla. None of them do. They look at the charges, the regulations, the neat lines of their legal framework. She's become an abstract problem to solve, a variable that doesn't fit their equations. And in their experience, variables that don't fit get removed. That's where we begin. Not with a dramatic confrontation or some grand speech, but with a woman standing alone in a room that smells like regret and high-voltage justice. The edge of extinction isn't always a dramatic cliff. Sometimes it's a quiet room where they decide whether kindness deserves death. 12 years before they tried to execute her, Kayla Frost walked through the blue-tinged forests of Talmar 5 with a survey scanner in her hand. The air felt different then, thick with the hum of unseen life, the damp scent of decay and new growth tangled together. No ozone, no judgment, just the quiet tension of a world still writing its own rules. She followed a trail of broken foliage, the kind that usually meant a large herbivore passing through. What she found was something else entirely. The net glittered in the dim light, its metallic threads woven through glowing vines. Professional-grade poacher equipment, the kind that leaves no chemical trace. Inside it thrashed a mass of dark scales and desperation. A juvenile dreadclaw, maybe 3 months old. Its spines were still soft at the tips. The net had sawed into its hind leg, the wound already puffing up with infection. Yellow pus seeped from the cuts. You could see the fever heat radiating off its skin. Regulation. 7 played in her head like a recorded message. Non-interference with developing ecosystems. Observational protocols only. The Concordance Manual spelled it out in clean, unambiguous terms. Predator species require natural selection pressures to maintain behavioral integrity. Intervention creates dependency patterns. Ecological contamination. She had the citations memorized. But the creature's breathing hitched in its throat, a wet, ragged sound that didn't care about regulations. Its eyes weren't the cold hunter's gaze the manuals described. They held pure animal terror. She stood there for 10 full minutes, scanner hanging at her side. The ethical equations ran through her mind, each variable neatly quantified. Probability of survival without intervention, less than 5%. Risk of behavioral alteration unknown. Consequences for her career, termination at minimum. The numbers all pointed one way. Then the Dreadclaw made a sound, not a roar, not a snarl. A weak coughing whimper. That's when she reached for her medkit. The first 6 weeks became a pattern of stolen moments. Ration packets from her own supplies reconstituted into a paste she could leave near the net. Antibiotic sprays applied from a distance at first, then closer as the creature stopped flinching. She never touched it directly, not then. She just watched the fever break. The wound crust over, the strength returned to its limbs. The net eventually frayed enough for it to escape on its own. She thought that would be the end of it. But the Dreadclaw kept returning to the clearing. It would appear at the same time each day, waiting. The first time it made that low rumbling sound in its chest, not a growl, something deeper and more content, she froze. Then she realized it was the sound it made while eating. She started calling it Grunt. Not a scientific designation, just a name. She didn't know she was forging a bond that would eventually force the entire Galactic Concordance to reconsider its fundamental principles. She just saw a suffering creature and made it stop suffering. The smallest possible mercy. The Galactic Concordance didn't just build their laws, they engineered an entire philosophy around predictability. Their conservation protocols demand ecological purity like a religion demands faith. Every regulation, every clause, every line in their manual serves one purpose: to keep nature operating like a perfectly calibrated machine. They see ecosystems as closed systems where every variable can be controlled, every outcome predicted. Intervention becomes heresy. Contamination becomes the ultimate sin. Their entire framework collapses if a single predator remembers kindness. That's the real tension humming beneath the ozone-scented air of the tribunal. It's not about one woman breaking rules, it's about their machine-like view of nature, cracking under the weight of a simple act of mercy. Natural order isn't just a concept to them. It's doctrine written into law, enforced with the rigidity of fundamentalists protecting sacred texts. They argue that compassion irrevocably alters developmental trajectories. A Dreadclaw that doesn't hunt humans breaks their entire classification system. In their models, predators should behave according to set patterns: aggression, territorial behavior, predictable responses to threats. A creature that forms bonds instead of initiating attacks doesn't just violate protocol, it invalidates their entire understanding of how life functions. Kayla's defense strikes at the heart of this ideology. She doesn't deny her actions. She challenges their premise. Ecosystems adapt, she argues. They're not static machines, they're dynamic, living systems that evolve through interaction. A predator capable of recognizing a benefactor isn't broken. It's demonstrating cognitive flexibility they never accounted for in their models. The tribunal counters with cold logic. Mercy creates more danger than death, they insist. A Dreadclaw that spares humans today might create false security tomorrow. They frame it as risk management, preventing future casualties by maintaining strict boundaries. Their fear isn't really about ecological contamination. It's about the unpredictability of connection. They can't quantify trust. They can't model gratitude. They have no equations for loyalty. Their entire system relies on creatures behaving like components in a machine, not thinking beings capable of forming relationships. Kayla's case exposes the flaw in their design. You can't regulate evolution. Life finds ways to adapt that no committee could ever anticipate. Their laws assume nature operates on fixed principles, but real ecosystems are messy, improvisational, and constantly rewriting their own rules. The more they argue against her actions, the more they reveal their own limitations. They built a perfect system for managing predictable interactions, but they never considered that some bonds might transcend their categories. A Dreadclaw remembering a human who fed it as a cub doesn't fit their spreadsheets. It challenges their authority to define how life should behave. That's the real preservation paradox. In trying to protect nature from contamination, they've created a system that can't accommodate nature's own complexity. Their fear of unpredictable connections reveals their discomfort with life's fundamental messiness. You can write all the laws you want, but you can't legislate against evolution. Sometimes life refuses to follow the manual. The prosecution doesn't present documents or witnesses. They project light, A holographic emitter hums to life in the center of the chamber, casting shifting colors across the delegates' faces. Then Kayla's own memories begin playing back as evidence. Her field recordings, her biometric logs, even her neural imprints, everything becomes testimony against her. The air fills with the sounds of Talmar V's forest, the scent of wet soil and bioluminescent plants. They've reconstructed the crime scene in perfect detail, but they've carefully edited the context. They freeze the image at the moment she first extended the ration pack. Her hand appears suspended in midair, the food cube visible between her fingers. The prosecutor's voice cuts through the silence. Note the deliberate offering of unauthorized nutrients to a classified predator. They zoom in until you can see the texture of the food cube, the slight tremor in her fingers. What the recording doesn't show is the creature's ribs visible through its scales or the way its breathing hitched. They've stripped away everything but the violation. Next comes the medical intervention. The hologram shows her applying antiseptic spray to the wounded leg. The prosecutor highlights the precise moment her hand crosses some imaginary boundary they'd drawn around the creature. Direct physical intervention without protective barriers. They enhance the image until the spray nozzle looks like a weapon. The infected wound becomes just background detail. They don't mention the pus, the fever heat, the way the creature had been twisting in the net for hours before she arrived. Then they play the audio. Grunt's low, rumbling sound vibrates through the chamber speakers. The prosecutor labels it behavioral manipulation through positive reinforcement. They analyze the sound frequency, the duration, the probable physiological effects on the creature. They don't call it contentment or relief. They call it conditioning. The sound of a living being experiencing comfort becomes evidence of corruption. Each holographic moment gets this treatment. They isolate actions from their circumstances until compassion looks like calculated interference. Her checking the wound becomes unauthorized examination. Her maintaining distance while observing becomes covert surveillance. Even her notes about the creature's improving health become documentation of ecological contamination. They've taken weeks of careful, hesitant care and turned it into a timeline of crimes. The magistrate watches all this with the same expression someone might use while reviewing engine schematics. When the presentation ends, she calls it the most sacred law broken. Not a regulation, not a protocol, a sacred law. That word hangs in the air. Sacred. They've elevated their bureaucratic procedures to religious doctrine, and Kayla's mercy becomes heresy. What strikes me isn't the technology or the legal arguments. It's how effectively they've turned kindness into something sinister. They've photographed mercy like a crime scene, documenting every gesture without any of the meaning behind it. The truth doesn't need context to condemn you when the system is designed to remove context entirely. They've built a judicial process that can take the most human impulse to help another suffering being and render it into a list of violations. The chamber feels colder after the holograms fade, not from temperature but from the understanding of what they're capable of doing to the truth. Kayla wasn't always standing where they could point fingers. 3 weeks before her own tribunal began, she sat on the other side of this process. She'd filed a standard planetary survey report about illegal mining operations on a protected world. Standard procedure, except the mining wasn't illegal. The concordance had quietly authorized it. Industrial drills had torn through 3 square miles of primary growth forest. Not the careful extraction their own regulations demanded, but full-scale mechanized mining. They were pulling rare crystalline metals from beneath a developing ecosystem. The operation had already collapsed 2 underground river systems and poisoned a breeding ground for a flightless avian species. All sanctioned, all permitted through back channel, approvals that never appeared on official dockets. The Preservation Act, the same one they're using to condemn Kayla, had 17 exemption clauses for economic priority projects. The mining consortium filed under Clause 6, Strategic Resource Acquisition. The tribunal reviewed it in closed session, approved it in 12 hours flat. No environmental impact reassessment, no species viability study. The same delegates now judging Kayla signed those permits. Her survey data showed 3 nascent species would go extinct if the mining continued. Not might, would. The math was clear. She testified before the same oversight committee that's now trying her, presented the evidence. They delayed the mining operation for further review, saved those species. Nobody charged the mining executives with criminal negligence. Nobody put the permitting delegates on trial. They just quietly shelved the project until publicity died down. Now those same delegates sit in judgment of her crimes. The hypocrisy hangs in the air, thicker than the ozone smell they pump through the vents. You can see it in the way they avoid her gaze, the way the prosecutor never mentions her conservation work while listing her violations. They're not punishing actual ecological damage. They're punishing someone who exposed their convenient double standard. Real threats get permits. Mercy gets execution orders. That's the unspoken equation governing this chamber. The mining operation would have wiped out entire species for profit, but it followed the proper paperwork trail. Kayla saved one creature outside the approved channels, so she stands accused of endangering an entire ecosystem. The dissonance would be laughable if the stakes weren't so final. They've turned the judicial process into a weapon against inconvenient truths. Kayla didn't just break protocol, she revealed that their protocols are flexible when money or power is involved. Her real crime was demonstrating that their Sacred Preservation Act has price tags and loopholes. That's what they can't forgive. Not the feeding of a dreadclaw cub, but the exposure of their selective enforcement. The mining executives faced no consequences. The permitting delegates received no reprimands. Only Kayla stands in the chamber smelling of burnt ozone and regret. They're not trying to protect ecosystems. They're protecting their right to decide which destruction gets approved and which compassion gets punished. The real contamination isn't human kindness, it's the corruption that masquerades as conservation. The prosecutor adjusts his robe, and you can see the shift in his posture. This isn't about Kayla Frost anymore. It's about humanity itself. He leans forward, his voice taking on a new, more dangerous tone. Your actions prove human beings are fundamentally incapable of following established protocols. The words hang in the ozone-scented air, heavy with implication. He's not just listing charges now. He's building a case against an entire species. He frames compassion as biological contamination, a dangerous evolutionary trait that humans carry like a virus. Our empathy isn't virtue to them. It's a flaw in our design. The bond with Grunt becomes Exhibit A in their argument. They point to the recordings, the feedings, the medical care. See how they infect other species with their sentimental weaknesses, the prosecutor says. See how they corrupt natural order with their emotional attachments. Kayla stands there, representing all human weakness in their eyes. She becomes the living proof of their theory. Every compassionate impulse, every moment of mercy, every act of kindness becomes evidence of our unfitness for interstellar conservation. They've taken her actions and extrapolated them into a galactic threat, humanity's greatest strength reframed as our most dangerous failing. The tribunal members nod along. You can see it in their postures. The slight leans forward, the focused attention. They're not just judging one woman's choices. They're deciding whether an entire species should be barred from conservation work, whether our emotional contamination poses too great a risk to their perfect, predictable ecosystems. Kayla doesn't lower her gaze. She doesn't apologize. When they give her the chance to speak, her voice remains steady. I saved a life, she says, simple, direct. No justification, no elaborate defense. Just the fundamental truth they're trying to criminalize. She won't frame mercy as something to regret. That's when the real stakes become clear. They don't just want to execute Kayla Frost. They want to sterilize the galaxy of human mercy, to eliminate what they see as a dangerous biological impulse before it spreads further. Their fear isn't about one dreadclaw remembering a kindness. It's about what happens when other species start expecting compassion. When their carefully constructed system of cold regulations faces the warmth of human connection. The prosecutor's final words land like a verdict already decided. Some infections must be contained before they spread. He means us. He means our capacity to care beyond rules, to help beyond protocols, to connect across species lines. They see it as a disease, a contagion of compassion that threatens their entire way of governing the cosmos. But here's what they don't understand. Some infections are worth spreading. Some contaminations improve whatever they touch. The galaxy could use more of what they're trying to eliminate. Their fear of human empathy reveals more about their limitations than ours. They've built a civilization so afraid of unpredictability that they'd rather execute kindness than risk its consequences. Kayla stands there silent again, having said all she needs to say. I saved a life. In their sterile, ozone-scented chamber of judgment, those 3 words sound more revolutionary than any legal argument. That's when Kayla's voice cuts through the legal rhetoric. Not loud, not angry, just clear. She doesn't address the charges directly. She goes after their fundamental premise. You treat ecosystems like machines, she says. Her words hang in the air, simple and direct. Input, output, cause and effect. Everything neat and predictable. She pauses, letting them absorb the critique. But life isn't like that. It adapts, it changes. It forms unexpected connections. That's not contamination. That's evolution. She turns toward the delegates, her gaze moving across their varied faces. If Grunt remembers and protects me, how is that a threat? Shouldn't preservation protect life in all its forms, even the forms that don't fit your models? The question hangs there, challenging their entire framework. They expected a defense of her actions. They're getting a challenge to their ideology. She argues that real ecosystems are messy, adaptive systems, not the sterile models they enforce. Predators that show mercy aren't broken, they're evolving, demonstrating behavioral flexibility that might actually enhance survival. The tribunal's ideal of purity has no place in living systems that thrive on complexity and change. Her words force delegates to confront their own rigid doctrines. You can see the discomfort in some postures, the thoughtful tilting of heads in others. For the first time, execution doesn't feel like justice. It feels like fear. Fear of change, fear of complexity, fear of life refusing to follow their neat categories. The Vexillian delegate starts chittering excitedly, translating for neighbors about unprecedented behavioral flexibility and adaptive advantage. The phrase symbiotic potential gets passed through the tiers. Some delegates look intrigued rather than outraged. Kayla's not just defending a crime anymore. She's redefining what nature means to them, challenging their entire concept of preservation. She stands there, a single human woman, forcing a galactic government to question whether their laws protect life or just their own control over it. The air still smells of ozone, but now there's something else mixed in. The scent of old certainties beginning to crack. Her final point lands with quiet force. Sometimes advancement looks like regression to those stuck in the past. She means their past, their outdated models, their fear of anything that doesn't fit predefined patterns. The chamber falls silent again, but this silence feels different. Not the quiet before an execution, but the stillness of people actually thinking, reconsidering. The prosecutor looks at his notes, then back at Kayla, then at the delegates. He seems uncertain for the first time. They came here to judge a violation of their rules. She's making them question whether their rules are violating nature itself. The shift is subtle but profound. Execution seemed inevitable minutes ago. Now it feels like a possibility among others. The delegates exchange glances. Some look troubled. Some look curious. A few look like they've just had their entire worldview challenged. Kayla stands calmly, having said what she needed to say. The ball's in their court now, and for the first time they look unsure about how to play it. The doors hiss open with a sound that cuts through the legal proceedings. Not the quiet sound of delegates entering late, but the sharp hydraulic hiss of reinforced bulkheads parting under pressure. Black uniforms fill the doorway. Earth Defense Coalition uniforms, crisp and unadorned except for the single blue planet insignia on each shoulder. Captain Marcus Webb stands at the center, his face neutral but his eyes scanning the chamber like he's assessing tactical positions. The air changes instantly. That ozone smell gets overpowered by something else, the scent of interrupted authority. Webb doesn't ask permission to enter. He walks in with the confidence of someone who knows exactly how much weight he represents. Earth's full diplomatic presence hangs in the air around him. You can feel the shift from philosophical debate to political confrontation. The tribunal members straighten in their seats. Some look annoyed. Others look suddenly uncertain. The prosecutor's datapad lowers slightly in his hands. Earth takes care of its own, Webb says. His voice carries without needing to be loud. The words echo in the chamber, simple and uncompromising. He doesn't look at Kayla. He looks at the magistrates, at the assembled delegates. His gaze sweeps across them like he's counting potential obstacles. There's no apology in his posture. No negotiation in his tone. Just raw, calculated strategy laid bare. He positions Kayla not as a defendant but as a symbol. A living representation of values worth defending. He doesn't argue legal technicalities or preservation protocols. He talks about what she represents. Compassion is strength. Mercy is evolutionary advantage. Connection is something to nurture rather than eliminate. His words reframe the entire conversation from criminal proceedings to ideological conflict. The Concordance faces more than one woman's trial now. They face Earth's demonstrated willingness to weaponize compassion, to treat mercy as something worth fighting for. Webb's presence makes it clear this isn't just about legal interpretation anymore. It's about whether Earth will accept their verdict or challenge their entire authority. The black uniforms standing behind him aren't armed, but the implication hangs in the air. This could escalate beyond courtroom debates. Webb offers them a choice wrapped in strategic language. He doesn't threaten directly. He outlines consequences, the potential for interstellar tension, the shifts in alliance structures, the recalibration of diplomatic relationships, every word carefully chosen to make them understand that punishing Kayla means confronting Earth's entire diplomatic and strategic apparatus. He's not here to beg for mercy. He's here to demonstrate costs. The room feels different now. The ozone scent seems less oppressive. The rigid formality of the proceedings feels suddenly fragile. Webb stands there, calm and unmoving, while the tribunal members exchange glances. Some look angry at the interruption. Some look relieved that someone else is making the decisions now. A few look like they're recalculating their positions entirely. This stopped being about law the moment Earth arrived. The legal arguments, the charges, the evidence, all of it becomes background noise to the new reality Webb represents. The Concordance built their system on predictable compliance. They never accounted for a species that would treat compassion as non-negotiable, that would send military diplomats to defend mercy, that would turn a conservation protocol violation into a potential diplomatic incident. Webb's final words hang in the air. We're not here to argue regulations. We're here to discuss consequences. The subtle shift in language says everything. He's moved the debate from their courtroom to his territory, from legal technicalities to real-world outcomes. The magistrates look at each other, then at Webb, then back at their screens. The certainty they had minutes ago seems to have evaporated. Diplomacy often wears the disguise of potential warfare, and right now Webb's calm presence feels more threatening than any weapon. Webb's offer doesn't come with threats of military action. It carries something far more dangerous, the weight of galactic public opinion. He positions himself between Kayla and the tribunal, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that feels more intimidating than any shout. Tell your story, he says, not to the judges but to Kayla. All of it. Let the galaxy see exactly what they're trying to destroy. The shift is immediate. This isn't legal defense anymore. It's media strategy. The tension in the room crystallizes around that single possibility. Execution would transform Kayla from defendant to martyr. Not just a woman who broke rules, but a symbol of compassionate intervention. The image writes itself, kindness executed by bureaucracy. Every news network across the settled systems would carry that story. The visual of a woman put to death for saving a life. The species punished for showing compassion. The Concordance's nightmare scenario materializing in real time. Earth could claim sovereignty over preservation ethics simply by letting the story unfold. They wouldn't need to fire a single shot. Just release the footage, the evidence, the unedited recordings of Kayla's care for the injured creature. The court transcripts themselves become damnation. The Concordance faces a simple binary choice: compromise or risk galaxy-wide rebellion. Not military rebellion, the kind that starts on news feeds and social platforms and grows into something unstoppable. Webb's bluff rests entirely on their fear of popular uprising. He knows their weakness isn't military, it's legitimacy. The Concordance built its authority on being the rational, fair arbiters of galactic order. Executing someone for mercy shatters that image. His calm confidence reveals the stakes better than any threat could. Let them blink first, he'd told his team before entering. That barbed optimism hangs in the air now. He's betting everything on their institutional cowardice. They're not just judging a case anymore. They're choosing between two futures. One where their rigid protocols remain unchallenged but risk turning Kayla into an interstellar symbol of resistance. Or one where they bend, allowing for the messy, uncomfortable reality that life doesn't always follow their neat categories. The delegates look at each other, at Webb, at Kayla. You can see the calculations happening behind their eyes. Cost-benefit analyses of compassion versus control. The strongest weapon in this chamber isn't plasma rifles or warships. It's the story waiting to be told. A narrative so simple and powerful, it could undo generations of careful political construction. Woman saves creature. Government kills woman. The simplicity of it terrifies them more than any complex legal argument. They can debate regulations and protocols for cycles, but they can't debate that basic storyline. It bypasses all their carefully constructed logic and goes straight to the emotional core of every species that cares about fairness. Webb stands there, watching them wrestle with the implications. He doesn't need to elaborate. The threat is elegant in its simplicity. Either they find a compromise, or Earth releases the story and lets galactic public opinion do the rest. The chamber feels different now. Less like a courtroom and more like a propaganda war waiting to happen. The ozone smell seems weaker, overwhelmed by the scent of impending headlines. Sometimes the most dangerous weapons aren't mounted on ships. They're made of images and words and the right story told at the right time. The decision comes down with the precision of a surgical instrument. But it feels more like a temporary patch than a solution. The tribunal announces execution has stayed pending formal review of preservation laws, a full-scale examination of protocols, they call it. Sounds impressive until you realize they've just postponed the hard choices. Neither side gets what they wanted. Both face consequences they didn't anticipate. The air in the chamber still smells like ozone, but now it's mixed with the scent of unfinished business. Kayla becomes liaison to a new multi-species committee. Fancy title for a permanent monitoring assignment. She'll work with scientists and ethicists from various species, helping draft new guidelines for edge cases. The kind of cases her actions created. It sounds like a promotion until you realize she's now under constant observation herself. Her movements tracked, her decisions reviewed. The freedom to act on compassion replaced by committee approvals and paperwork. The bond with Grunt becomes subject to scientific supervision. Not friendship anymore, a phenomenon to be studied. They'll document every interaction, analyze every behavioral nuance, turn their connection into data points for reports. What was once a simple act of mercy becomes a controlled experiment. The creature she saved now reduced to a case study in their files. They'll measure his responses, chart his development, treat their bond like a variable to be quantified. Earth gets accountability with potential for reform. The concordance must include human scientists on the review committee. Must consider Earth's perspectives in the new frameworks. It looks like a victory until you realize how slowly galactic bureaucracies move. The potential for reform could take decades to materialize. The accountability comes with enough procedural obstacles to drain most of its meaning. They've given Earth a seat at the table, but the table's still shaped like a concordance interrogation room. The concordance avoids immediate rebellion but cedes ground. They keep their authority intact for now, but they've admitted their laws might need changing. That crack in their certainty will only widen with time. They prevented Earth from making Kayla a martyr, but they've made her a permanent reminder that their system isn't perfect. A living, breathing critique of their rigidity walking their hallways every day. Webb's crew reveals the terms were deliberately crafted for balance, not justice, not resolution. Balance. The agreement gives each side just enough to avoid open conflict while satisfying none of their actual goals. Kayla isn't executed, but she's not free. The laws aren't upheld, but they're not overturned. The status quo remains, but now everyone knows it's fragile. This isn't justice. It's strategic postponement. Kicking the difficult decisions down the road while pretending to address them. Sometimes progress looks like nobody getting what they wanted. The concordance keeps its authority but loses its certainty. Earth saves Kayla but accepts permanent oversight. Kayla keeps her life but trades freedom for influence. The compromise satisfies the immediate crisis while ensuring the underlying tensions will resurface. The delegates look relieved that they avoided a confrontation, but their expressions show they know this is temporary. The real decisions still loom ahead, waiting for someone with the courage to make them. The chamber empties slowly, the ozone smell lingering like a promise that this isn't over. Just delayed. The real power Earth wielded in that chamber wasn't military. It was narrative. Webb's threat to release the full story shifted the entire debate from legal technicalities to public perception. The concordance delegates understood something fundamental. Their authority rested on consensus, not just force. They could handle Earth's fleet if it came to that. They couldn't handle every news network across the settled systems running the same headline. Woman executed for saving life. Image would resonate across species lines in ways their carefully crafted regulations never could. The woman punished for showing compassion becomes their nightmare scenario, not because it's militarily significant, but because it's morally simple. A child could understand the injustice. Complex legal arguments about preservation protocols and ecological contamination dissolve when faced with the basic story of someone being killed for an act of mercy. The Concordance built its authority on being the rational, fair arbiter of galactic order. That story would crack that foundation in ways no weapon could. Kayla's case transforms into a litmus test for their entire governance model. Either they uphold rigid laws that punish compassion, or they adapt to accommodate the messy reality of interspecies connections. The choice becomes binary: maintain control at the cost of popular support, or evolve at the cost of their certainty. Webb's genius was making them see that choice clearly. He didn't need to threaten war. He just needed to show them the consequences of their own rigidity. The subtext becomes unmistakable. Earth fights for individuals in ways the Concordance never anticipated. Their system deals in populations, statistics, broad regulations. Earth's intervention on behalf of one woman exposes that limitation. It demonstrates that humanity values individual lives enough to risk diplomatic incidents over them. That willingness to escalate for a single person becomes a strategic advantage they never accounted for. Their entire bureaucratic apparatus struggles to respond to something so personal, so emotionally resonant. The Concordance fears public opinion more than Earth's fleet, because public opinion can't be fought with ships or weapons. It spreads through networks and conversations, shifting allegiances and undermining authority from within. A plasma rifle has clear specifications, predictable effects. A story's impact can't be measured or contained. It changes how beings think, what they believe, who they trust. The delegates know this. They've seen civilizations rise and fall on narratives. They understand that control of information means control of reality. Webb's strategy leverages that understanding perfectly. He offers them a simple choice: compromise now or face a galaxy-wide reconsideration of their legitimacy. The threat isn't implicit violence, it's explicit exposure. He'll show everyone what they're really about. Not protectors of order, but punishers of compassion. Not guardians of life, but enforcers of cold regulations. That narrative terrifies them more than any warship because it attacks the core of their identity. Sometimes the pen proves mightier than the plasma rifle. Not because words are physically stronger, but because they travel faster, reach deeper, and change minds in ways weapons never could. The Concordance could defend against an armada. They can't defend against an idea whose time has come. The image of Kayla feeding that injured creature, the sound of its contented rumble, the simple fact that she saved a life. These become weapons more potent than any fleet. The delegates look at Webb, at Kayla, at each other. They're not calculating military odds anymore. They're calculating how to survive the story. The story ignites across the galaxy faster than anyone anticipated. News networks pick it up like oxygen feeding a fire. One moment it's a bureaucratic hearing in a closed chamber. The next, Kayla's face flashes across 1,000 systems. The image crystallizes instantly. Human woman, dreadclaw creature, the simple narrative of compassion punished. It bypasses language barriers and cultural differences. Everyone understands saving a life. Everyone understands being punished for it. Her fate ties directly to broader conversations people were already having. Ethics committees that usually debate abstract principles suddenly face a concrete example. Intervention protocols get discussed in public forums instead of closed sessions. The agreement to form a review committee signals something significant, not just bureaucratic maneuvering. Actual scientists and ethicists start replacing pure bureaucrats in the discussions. People who understand that life doesn't follow neat categories. Various species begin weighing the messy questions she raised. Farmers on agricultural worlds report protecting creatures they once considered lethally dangerous. Scientists document unexpected interspecies cooperations that don't fit existing models. The very definition of predator undergoes a semantic shift across multiple languages. It's no longer just hunter versus prey. New categories emerge: protector, ally, companion. The galaxy starts questioning what preservation should really protect. Static purity or dynamic relationships? Public sentiment visibly shifts toward inclusive governance. Polls show support for considering emotional bonds in conservation decisions. Petitions circulate demanding representation for species capable of cross-species connections. The Concordance faces pressure to accelerate reforms they'd planned to delay for years. Earth's position shifts from outlier to innovator in interspecies ethics. Their willingness to defend compassion becomes a diplomatic asset rather than a liability. The images get shared billions of times, not the legal documents or the court transcripts. The simple pictures. Kayla offering food, the Dreadclaw's content rumble, the moment of recognition in the chamber. They become symbols larger than the specific case. A visual language for compassion that transcends species. The story spreads through networks and conversations, shifting allegiances in ways weapons never could. One woman's act becomes everyone's conversation. Dinner tables, research facilities, trading posts. Everywhere people gather, they're talking about the implications. Not as abstract policy debates, but as personal questions. How would I act in that situation? What lines would I cross to save a life? The conversation moves from theoretical ethics to practical morality. From what the rules say to what feels right. The cultural shift becomes measurable. Protection orders get filed for species previously marked for elimination. Research grants get approved for studying interspecies communication. The Concordance's rigid protocols start looking outdated, not just strict. Their fear of unpredictability seems increasingly like a failure of imagination. The galaxy begins valuing connection over control, adaptation over rigidity. Sometimes the smallest pebble starts the largest landslide. Kayla's simple act of feeding an injured creature becomes that pebble. The repercussions ripple through legal systems, cultural norms, and scientific understanding. The chamber's ozone smell gets replaced by the scent of change spreading across the stars. Not through force or legislation, but through a story too powerful to ignore. A story about what happens when mercy outlasts regret. Kayla's return to Talmar 5 felt less like a homecoming and more like stepping into a new skin. The air carried the same damp forest scent, the same bioluminescent glow, but nothing else remained familiar. She arrived not as a field researcher or defendant, but as what Captain Webb called a living bridge. The title sounded important until you saw the reality. Weekly reporting requirements, formal liaison duties, constant monitoring. Her freedom exchanged for influence. Her spontaneity replaced by scheduled observations. The Concordance had already begun negotiating wider rulemaking frameworks. New committees forming, protocols being drafted, all while Kayla adjusted to her restricted existence. The ongoing observation of her bond with Grunt became a mandated study. Scientists would document every interaction, analyze every behavioral nuance. What was once a quiet friendship became data points in research files. They'd measure his responses, chart his development, treat their connection like a variable to be quantified rather than a relationship to be valued. Then came the crowd. Not Concordance officials or scientists, but ordinary beings who'd followed her story. They stood at the forest's edge, holding signs that read, "Grunt remembers. We remember." Their voices rose not in protest but in quiet affirmation, a social testament to empathy's value that no tribunal could legislate away. The scientists kept recording, but now they were documenting something larger than one human Dreadclaw bond. They were witnessing a cultural shift taking physical form. Kayla became both symbol and data point simultaneously, a living case study for new approaches to interspecies relations. Her punishment transformed into her purpose. The restrictions that confined her also positioned her to influence the very systems that once condemned her. She'd help write the new rules governing compassionate intervention. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The woman they'd tried to execute for breaking protocols would now help create better ones. The emotional reunion unfolded under scientific observation. Kayla stepped toward Grunt, her movements calm despite the recording equipment tracking every gesture. He emerged from the foliage larger than she remembered, his scales catching the blue light. His amber eyes held recognition, not predation. The low rumble in his chest echoed through the clearing. The same sound that once condemned her now documented as evidence of cross-species bonding. She placed her hand on his snout, whispering, "Hey buddy, I'm back." The moment felt both intensely private and historically significant. Sometimes captivity looks like liberation from the right angle. Her movements might be monitored, her actions documented, but she stood exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she believed in. The restrictions became the framework through which she could demonstrate that some bonds transcend regulations. That compassion isn't contamination but connection. The scientists kept recording, but the story had already escaped their control. It belonged to everyone now. The woman who saved a life, the creature who remembered. And the galaxy watching them proved that mercy matters more than rules. Scientists showed up with their instruments and protocols, ready to document what the tribunal had called contamination. They expected to find evidence supporting their theories. expected the data to confirm that human interference created behavioral anomalies, that compassion corrupted natural development. Grunt's behavior became the most studied phenomenon in modern conservation science. Teams of researchers descended on Telmar 5, their equipment humming with the promise of objective measurement. They came looking for proof that Kayla had broken something fundamental. Instead, they found mutual respect. The Dreadclaw demonstrated behavioral flexibility that contradicted every established model. His interactions with Kayla weren't trained responses. They were earned through consistent care and trust. The data stream showed patterns the scientists hadn't anticipated: protective behavior without aggression, recognition without conditioning, intelligence that went beyond instinctual responses. Their instruments measured what their theories said shouldn't exist. The protection Grunt offered Kayla wasn't some manipulated behavior. It emerged naturally from their history together. He remembered her, recognized her, chose to safeguard her. The scientists watched him position himself between Kayla and perceived threats without any prompting. They recorded the low rumble he made when she approached. The same sound that once condemned her now documented as evidence of cross-species bonding. Their sensors picked up physiological responses that indicated calm association rather than predatory calculation. The ecosystem data proved even more surprising. Rather than damaging the local environment, the bond appeared to enhance it. Grunt's territory showed increased biodiversity. His hunting patterns became more selective, avoiding species that played crucial ecological roles. The researchers found improved soil quality near their meeting areas, better water retention in the watershed. What they'd labeled contamination was actually functioning like a stabilizing influence. The edge case started looking like a beneficial adaptation. Other species began reporting similar cross-species connections once the study results started circulating. Farmers described protective relationships with creatures once considered dangerous. Researchers documented unexpected cooperative behaviors between predator and prey species. The phenomenon wasn't isolated to human Dreadclaw interactions. It appeared across multiple systems, multiple ecologies. The exception began looking like part of a larger pattern everyone had been ignoring. The conservation community faced a fundamental shift. What they'd called crime became breakthrough. The data forced them to reconsider their basic assumptions about interspecies relationships. The rigid protocols that once seemed like necessary safeguards started looking like limitations. The scientists kept recording, but their focus changed from proving contamination to understanding connection. Their reports filled with terms like adaptive intelligence and mutualistic bonding instead of behavioral anomalies. Sometimes the exception proves the rule needs rewriting. The Kayla-Grunt bond became that exception. It demonstrated that their preservation models were incomplete, that life could form connections that enhanced rather than damaged ecosystems, that compassion might be a feature of advanced intelligence rather than a flaw. The scientists packed up their instruments with more questions than answers, but the right kind of questions, the kind that moves understanding forward instead of locking it in place. The research didn't just change how they saw one human and one Dreadclaw. It changed how they saw the entire concept of preservation. Protection didn't have to mean isolation. Conservation could include connection. The data made that clear in numbers and graphs and behavioral charts. The story the instruments told was different from the story the tribunal had believed. One was based on fear of contamination. The other was based on evidence of adaptation. The committee's work underwent a fundamental shift. They stopped treating Kayla's case as an anomaly. Instead, they started rewriting the core principles governing interspecies relations. Preservation stopped being a static code. It evolved into a responsive practice that had to account for real-world complexities. The tension became about finding a sustainable balance, maintaining ecological integrity, while making space for compassionate intervention when circumstances demanded it. They replaced rigid protocols with case-based judgments. Each situation would be evaluated on its unique merits, rather than forcing everything into predetermined categories. Mercy became a measurable factor in conservation decisions. They developed assessment scales for evaluating compassionate interventions, weighing potential ecological impacts against ethical considerations. What was once automatic violation became a calculable variable in their decision matrices. Humanity's empathy transformed from liability to asset. Our capacity for cross-species connection became something to incorporate, rather than eliminate. The galaxy gradually learned to accommodate life's inherent messiness, the unpredictable connections, the unexpected bonds, the relationships that didn't fit their neat models. Kayla's actions shifted from criminal precedent to legal precedent. Her case established the framework for evaluating future edge cases involving interspecies compassion. They didn't break the system, they forced it to grow. The Concordance's legal framework expanded to include variables it had previously ignored. Compassionate intervention protocols now existed alongside traditional preservation measures. The review committee's work demonstrated that sometimes progress requires breaking something to build it better. Their rigid protocols needed cracking open to accommodate the complexity of actual ecosystems. The new framework acknowledged that life doesn't follow clean categories. It adapts, forms unexpected connections, demonstrates intelligence where they expected only instinct. Their previous system treated nature like a machine to be calibrated. The new approach recognized it as a dynamic, evolving network of relationships. Protection no longer meant isolation. Conservation could include connection when the evidence supported it. Kayla's role evolved from defendant to consultant. She helped draft the new guidelines, her practical experience informing theoretical frameworks. The scientists who once documented her contamination now sought her insights on interspecies bonding. Her punishment became her purpose, helping create a system that could accommodate the compassion that nearly got her executed. The changes spread beyond legal documents. Training programs incorporated new modules on ethical intervention. Field researchers received updated manuals that included compassion assessment protocols. The entire approach to galactic conservation shifted from fear-based restriction to evidence-based adaptation. They learned to measure mercy rather than simply prohibiting it. Sometimes breaking the rules proves the rules need changing. Kayla's violation of protocol didn't destroy the preservation system. It revealed its limitations and forced necessary evolution. The new framework wasn't perfect. No system ever is. But it acknowledged that life is more complex than any set of regulations can fully capture. Progress often looks like destruction before it looks like improvement. The old system had to break to make room for something better suited to reality. Kayla steps back onto Talmar 5's soil, the blue-tinged light catching the edges of her silhouette. The forest hasn't changed much. Same bioluminescent glow, same damp earth scent, same quiet hum of life. But she walks differently now. Not like a trespasser or a defendant, like someone coming home to a place that nearly killed her. The air feels lighter without the threat of execution hanging over it. Just the forest, the memories, and the weight of what comes next. Grunt emerges from the foliage without sound. He's larger than the recording showed, more substantial. His scales catch the light differently than I expected. Not like armor, more like living stone. He stops several meters away, testing the air. His head tilts in that familiar gesture the scientist documented so carefully. The amber eyes hold recognition, not predation. No aggression in his posture. Just assessment, curiosity, maybe something like relief. They stand there for a long moment, just looking. No rush, no drama. The recording equipment hums softly in the background, but it feels distant, irrelevant. This isn't about documentation anymore. It's about two beings reconnecting across time and regulations. Grunt makes that low rumbling sound deep in his chest, the one that got labeled contentment vocalization in the official reports. Kayla smiles. A real one, not the tight expression she wore during the tribunal. "Hey, buddy," she says. Her voice stays soft, but it carries. The words hang in the air between them, simple and weighted with history. 12 years of separation, a galactic trial, rewritten laws, all contained in 2 syllables. Grunt takes a step forward. Then another. His movements stay deliberate, controlled. No sudden gestures. He remembers the protocols even if he doesn't understand them. She reaches out slowly, palm up. Not offering food this time, just connection. Her hand rests on his snout, the scales warm under her touch. The gesture feels both incredibly simple and monumentally significant. A human touching a dreadclaw without barriers, without fear, without violating any laws. The scientists keep recording, but their instruments can't measure what's passing between them. Trust doesn't register on sensors. Loyalty doesn't show up in data streams. "I'm back," she whispers. The words sound like a promise, like a declaration. Grunt responds with another rumble, this one vibrating through the ground under their feet. His head presses slightly into her hand. The movement says everything the tribunal never understood. This isn't conditioning, isn't manipulation. It's partnership. Two species finding common ground despite every rule designed to keep them apart. They stand like that for a while, the forest humming around them. The observers stay quiet, respecting the moment. Even the most clinical-minded scientists seem aware they're witnessing something beyond their metrics. A living counterexample to stagnation, proof that bonds can transcend categories and regulations, that some connections refuse to be broken by bureaucracy or fear. Eventually, Grunt turns slightly, gesturing with his head toward the deeper forest. An invitation. Kayla follows without hesitation. They move together into the blue-tinged shadows, two friends returning to the work they started years ago. Not hiding anymore, not breaking rules, just living the reality the galaxy is still learning to accept. Some friendships refuse to be driven out by regulations. The heart finds its home where the gentle refuse to leave. The victory feels real enough in the moment, but it's built on temporary scaffolding. That stay of execution isn't an acquittal. It's a postponement, a strategic pause that leaves all the difficult questions unanswered. The formal review could still condemn Kayla's actions, reinforcing the very protocols she challenged. The multi-species committee might decide that her case should remain an isolated exception rather than become a precedent, locking the old rigid systems back into place. Everyone celebrates the immediate reprieve, but the fundamental conflict remains unresolved, simmering beneath the surface of bureaucratic processes. Earth's leverage depends entirely on sustained public interest, which is a notoriously fragile commodity. The galactic news cycle moves fast. Today's emotional story about compassion becomes tomorrow's forgotten footnote when the next crisis erupts. The Concordance knows this. They understand that time is their ally. If public attention wanes, their incentive to compromise evaporates. They could easily revert to rigidity under different leadership, especially if new officials decide that appeasing Earth isn't worth the perceived dilution of their principles. The political landscape can shift overnight, and yesterday's hard-won agreement can become tomorrow's abandoned policy. Other edge cases might not receive the same compassionate consideration that Kayla's did. Without the perfect storm of media attention, Earth's intervention, and a photogenic bond with a dangerous creature, another researcher making a similar choice could find themselves facing the full weight of unyielding protocol. The framework remains untested in a true crisis situation, where the stakes are higher and the emotions aren't as universally sympathetic. What happens when the compassionate choice isn't feeding a cute cub but making a difficult decision that has real ecological consequences? Kayla's role as liaison could easily become a gilded cage, a permanent limitation disguised as influence. They've given her a title and a committee seat, but real power might remain with the same bureaucrats who wanted her executed. Her freedom to act could be constrained by endless reviews and approvals, her every move monitored and second-guessed. The system has a way of absorbing rebels and turning them into functionaries, neutralizing their threat while maintaining the appearance of change. Her influence might prove more symbolic than substantive. The data collection from her supervised interactions with Grunt could be used against future cases rather than supporting them. If the scientists find any evidence that doesn't perfectly align with the new framework, however minor, it could be weaponized to reinforce the old protocols. The observation mandate creates a permanent record that can be scrutinized and interpreted to serve whatever agenda holds power. Even positive findings can be dismissed as anomalies or special circumstances that don't apply broadly. The victory feels fragile because it is. The underlying tension between compassion and control hasn't been resolved, just temporarily managed. The battle hasn't been won, merely postponed. The Concordance still fundamentally believes in predictable systems and controllable variables. Earth still values individual compassion over bureaucratic purity. These are incompatible worldviews that will inevitably clash again, perhaps under circumstances less favorable to mercy. Sometimes the battle ends just before the next war begins, and everyone knows it but pretends otherwise. The uneasy peace hangs in the air, waiting for the next crisis to test its limits. The story escaped containment almost immediately. It didn't stay in courtrooms or committee hearings. It spread through cargo ship gossip and station news feeds, moving faster than any official transmission. Ordinary beings across different systems started reconsidering their own relationships with the life around them. You'd hear conversations in docking bays and market stalls, Not about regulations, but about that human woman and the creature that remembered her. The narrative bypassed official channels and went straight to something more fundamental. Farmers on agricultural colonies began reporting unexpected behaviors. Protective instincts toward creatures they'd once considered lethally dangerous. A grower on the outer rim stopped eliminating the sharp-toothed mammals that threatened his crops when he found them guarding his children from a venomous swarming insect. A mining colony on a frozen world started leaving food out for the ice scorpions after noticing they only took what they needed and kept other predators away from the settlement perimeters. These weren't ordered changes. They emerged naturally from people reconsidering what coexistence might look like. Scientists documented the shift in formal terms, but the evidence spoke for itself. Unexpected interspecies cooperations appeared in their field reports. Predator species demonstrating protective behavior toward potential prey. Prey species showing reduced fear responses in controlled environments. The data piled up, suggesting that the Kayla-Grunt bond wasn't an anomaly, but part of a broader pattern everyone had been overlooking. Their instruments measured what their theories said shouldn't exist, and gradually the theories started changing to match the evidence. The very definition of predator underwent a semantic shift across multiple languages. It stopped meaning just hunter and started encompassing protector, ally, sometimes even companion. The Concordance's educational materials required updates. Their classification systems needed new categories. What was once a simple binary of dangerous versus safe became a spectrum of possible relationships. The change happened gradually, then all at once, as more examples accumulated from across the settled systems. Galactic culture began valuing connection over control in subtle but measurable ways. Popular media featured stories about interspecies partnerships. Conservation funding shifted toward studies of cooperative behaviors rather than just predation patterns. The public's appetite for stories about understanding between species grew faster than anyone anticipated. The shift wasn't mandated, it emerged organically from countless small decisions made by ordinary beings who'd been exposed to a different way of seeing things. Earth's position transformed from outlier to innovator almost overnight. Our willingness to defend compassion became a diplomatic advantage rather than a liability. Other species started seeking human consultants for interspecies relation projects. Our empathy, once framed as biological contamination, became a sought-after perspective in ethical debates. The shift happened so completely that within a standard cycle, nobody could remember why human compassion had ever been considered dangerous. The Concordance faced increasing pressure to accelerate reforms they'd planned to implement slowly. Public sentiment, once their tool for maintaining control, now pushed them toward changes they'd resisted. They had to convene emergency sessions to address the growing demand for updated protocols. The committee that once condemned Kayla now scrambled to incorporate the new understanding she'd helped create. Their bureaucratic machinery groaned under the strain of adapting to a reality it wasn't designed to handle. One act of kindness managed to rewire interstellar consciousness because it tapped into something universal. The desire for connection transcends species. The capacity for recognition across biological divides exists everywhere, waiting for someone to demonstrate it's possible. Kayla's story became the proof that opened countless other possibilities. The smallest pebble sometimes reshapes the entire beach not through force, but by changing how the water flows around it. The ripple effect continues spreading, and nobody can predict where it will stop.